All right, let's see how we can display checkboxes. So we type input. Now if we press tab, we get an input of type text. But let me show you a trick. If we type input followed by colon, now we can see other types of inputs. So we have button, checkbox, color, date, and so on. Now if we press enter here, we get an input of type checkbox. For now, we don't need the name attribute. This is only used for submitting the form. So if we save the changes, we get a checkbox. Now all checkboxes need a label right after them. So over here, we add a label element. We want to associate this with our input. So first, we give our input an ID. Let's say front end. And now we use the same identifier over here. Now for our label, we're going to say front end. So here's what we get. Now, the reason this label appears on a new line is because Milligram turns this to a block level element. So let's inspect this real quick. Take a look. So the display property is set to block, and this is coming from milligram.css. Now to put this right next to the checkbox, we have to use one of the utility classes in Milligram. So back to our markup, we're going to give this label a class of label-inline. How do I know this class? I found it on the documentation. So if you go to milligram.io and go to docs, then forms, you can see various examples. So over here, we have a checkbox, and right next to that, we have a label with this class. This is how I found this class. Now back to our page. Here's our label. Beautiful. Now when we use a label and associate it with a checkbox, we can click on the label and the checkbox gets selected. Okay. Now, most of the time, we want to wrap these two elements inside a container like div, so we can stack them vertically. So I'm going to select these two elements, bring up the command palette, type wrap, and then div. So now these elements are inside a div. Next, I'm going to duplicate this entire div. And for our second checkbox, I'm going to change its ID to backend. We should also update the value of the for attribute as well as this label, backend. So we have two checkboxes. We can select one or more items. Great. Now, if we want to check this checkbox by default, we can apply the checked attribute. This is a Boolean attribute, so it doesn't need a value. And here's what we get. Earlier, we also talked about the disabled attribute. That also works here. So now we cannot check this item. So this is all about checkboxes. Next, we're going to talk about radio buttons.